The following video is brought to you by Skillshare.com, where you can find more than 25,000 online courses to help hone a career or start a company in design, business, technology, media, and more. Get 2 months of free access in the link in the description. Hello and welcome to Super Bunny Hop, where, just like you, I also wanted to be a game tester for 2 weeks when I was 6 years old. The childhood fantasy of game testing being a hedonistic life of well-paid laziness has evolved into a more professional perception of game testing being a stepping stone to a more distinguished job instead. That was the career advice I heard at countless trade shows, conventions, and expos, let's say 6 to 8 years ago. It was, if you wanted to be a game developer, work your way up from QA. Nowadays, we live on the internet, so career advice skews more towards asking kids who want to develop games to go ahead and develop games on their own in their free time out of college, while simultaneously also working a day job. Game testers I've spoken to said that promotions from QA to game development still happen, just not as frequently as they used to, and that they're now also facing the same unspoken rule of corporate favoritism that undercuts the meritocracy of damn near every single entry-level employment possibility in our entire economy. Want to work your way up from QA nowadays? Well, in that case, it's not about what you know, it's who you know. Which isn't exactly 100% quid pro quo nepotism either. Working your way up is now also a matter of somehow finding the free time and energy to work on portfolio projects so that you can show your newfound networking contacts them and hopefully impress them. The childhood fantasy may be dead and the corporate fantasy may be on its way out, but together they make a history that they still use to get ya.
I can't believe we got jobs doing this.
They still wouldn't pay you for that if they could or would do it themselves. Of course, the reality differing from the advertising is that being a QA tester is less like playing video games all day than it is like doing work. You're not playing games naturally for the sake of enjoying them here. You're not even really consuming entertainment products. You are grinding your way through a job. You're going through checklists and quotas and paperwork that all ask you to click through the same menus again and again, run into the same walls again and again, basically replicate the same conditions and positions and tasks over and over again, day in, day out, until they all start to look the same, until the end of the production process when you work a shitload of overtime and then get kicked out. Video game quality assurance is done by 3 different kinds of departments: developer QA, publisher QA, and third-party QA, depending on whether or not their testing facility is managed by a game developer you know and love, a game publisher you know and hate, or a weird third-party technology business consulting firm you've probably never heard of that may damn well almost be a shell company. Publishers just outsource the jobs to those names, even though they'll still have you working in the same building in the same offices on the same games as the publisher. Because so long as you're technically paid by someone else, your labor grievances are not going to be the publisher's concerns. I put out a call for QA testers to share their stories and answer some questions and got about 15 responses, and a very, very common answer was that they all wanted to insist that not all QA jobs are bad. Negative memories naturally stick out more than positive ones, but QA testers do develop a sense of humor, camaraderie, and pride over their profession. They are still making a product that'll bring hours of enjoyment into the lives of millions, and there is a kind of mental stimulation to the job that can turn the methodical repetition of it all into logic puzzles. There is a surprising number of people who do enjoy doing this for a living, but positions for them are slim, and they are constantly being reminded, in quite unhealthy ways, of how they are stuck on one of the lowest rungs of the video game making ladder. Apologies to those stuck in sweatshops in Asia. But unfortunately, other responses included stories of low pay, long hours, regular predictable layoffs, quotas, patronizing bosses, hot, cramped, and dirty facilities. And these jobs don't exactly attract the most, mature and professional of colleagues, because the bar for entry is low, which means they're easily replaceable, which means the jobs don't last long, and all of that is quite intentional by design. I also am gonna say that a lot of their responses included heavy usage of non-disclosure agreements in their contracts and blacklisting being a thing. Do not hire lists. So they're not exactly in a great position to expose themselves and advocate for their jobs, and people need steady jobs to avoid homelessness, so I'm gonna start us off with the low pay. What can a part-time entry-level QA tester expect when just starting out? Of course, it depends on the studio, but to lowball for the bigger publishers and third-party QA outfits, you're probably going to be starting out at about $10 to $14 an hour. Split a place with a roommate, and this can be livable in some of the cheaper tech cities like Montreal, Austin, or Atlanta. But try and live on that in a suburb outside of LA or San Francisco, where most of the video game employers are actually located, and suddenly that's just not possible. Ironically, many of the lowest wages I was told about were reported out of California, where the cost of living is the most expensive. Something doesn't seem to add up. Unless, that is, you add in the extra overtime hours spent grinding through the game industry's famously lengthy trials of crunch time. This excessive overtime has testers working 10, 12, and up to 24-hour-long days towards the end of a game's production cycle. Crunch time extends over weekends, over entire months. Crunch time is only broken for holidays and nothing else. I had testers tell me they worked entire consecutive months straight. Which brings a dynamic into this mix that is truly egregious, unhealthy, and ethically questionable. And that is unlivable low pay, unless they work crunch time. It's interesting to note that the respondents who reported the longest hours and lowest wages were working out of publisher QA or third-party QA in California, where their employers barely skirted above the state's $10, $11 minimum wage. Despite working what are far longer than full-time employment hours, they are earning far, far less for it. Of course, overtime is only encouraged and never explicitly stated to be required or enforced, but you know, homelessness, starvation, and debt are all their own enforcement mechanisms. The general trend I'm seeing here is that publisher QA are the jobs you don't want. They are factories, they are mills, and so long as video games are cool, there will never be a shortage of nerdy kids filling those low-bar entry-level slots. So, if you're looking to get into this stuff, and you see a job listing for QA by a big California game publisher, maybe scroll on past. And not just for the pay, for a list of other reasons I'm about to get into later too. Respondents from the northern US states and from Canada did not report having the same experience at all, as well as those employed by the smaller QA outfits managed by developers rather than publishers, regardless of what state they were in. However, even in that case, you're still weighing the bloat and the stress of big-budget AAA blockbuster game development against the smaller and more personable employment experience of working on smaller, less popular games. Boring cell phone games no one's ever heard of might actually have the happiest employees working for them, judging by the emails I've been getting. At developer QA, wages generally get higher the more expensive the city, extending over $20 an hour with some positions that have full-time, benefits-rich packages. And those testers, who are more often QA leads or QA engineers, truly are the lucky ones. The ones who manage to land full-time, permanent positions. There aren't many of those to go around, because the next issue I'm getting into are the layoffs. Game development happens in cycles that can last from 2 to 4 years, and full-speed production really doesn't happen until the second half of that cycle. So for QA developers who clean up bugs and glitches and aren't going to be mass utilized until towards the end of a game's development cycle, they're hired on and off on almost seasonal terms. Contracts, and the vast majority of testers employed by employers are contractors, not employees, generally last from 3 months to project-length terms of 1.5 years, and once that time's up, I don't know. That is the standard MO, and there is a reluctance among testers to call these layoffs since they can fairly accurately guess their job's expiration date nice and early on. However, they have developed a piece of jargon for those periods of unemployment. Those are called contract breaks, in which they don't work, they don't have any guarantees of getting work again, they just kind of live off of savings and unemployment while hoping that they get a call back to return in a matter of weeks. Which would also make it a great time to take some online courses at Skillshare.com, who have sponsored this video with 2 free months for the first 500 subscribers who click the link below. Skillshare.com offers video courses such as Contract Law for Freelancers and Change the World, Make a Social Issues Documentary, so you too can research labor violations, negotiating skills, and how to engage with the media in case your boss tries to screw you over. Bug quotas are a kind of outdated practice that are on their way out, but boy oh boy did they create some stories to tell. In an average day, an average QA tester is going to find between 5 and 10 bugs, but a truly unlucky QA tester might have to fill out a quota of 5 to 10 bugs, and of course this makes things weird. And of course this happens to be a trend that I heard coming more out of publisher QA and their third-party outsourcers. People who hadn't worked from those kinds of businesses, they had never heard of this stuff. They had no idea what I was asking about. Bug quotas incentivize staff to participate in a practice known as bug theft, in which testers overlook or overhear the bugs other testers are working on in order to rush out their own bug report on it. This also incentivized testers to write up every single little thing they came across rather than write up the generalization or the pattern that was making them all noticeable. And I'm actually told that the ability to do that kind of deductive detective work, that is the primary quality that game developers want out of their QA teams. And you know, once you do fill out that quota, why not just sit on your ass for the rest of the day and do nothing? That's actually a lot of what goes on at these excessively long periods of crunch time, and all of this created an adversarial relationship between the developers who would assign those bug quotas and the QA who, upon receiving them, suddenly had incentives that contradicted those of the developers. This adversarial relationship between two different tiers in the hierarchy of two drastically different pay grades created classism. QA is still seen as expendable. It is still assumed that the vast majority of people in those departments are going to want to move out someday, and it even sounds like most of advancement and promotion is tied to showing interest in and networking with other departments instead of QA. Even QA leads typically are not promoted internally from within the same company. This drives a wedge between the poorly paid testers, who in the bigger companies are shipped in and out by the hundreds, and game developers who get to stay longer and are paid better. And this gets manifested into some both petty and serious demonstrations of where they are in the company hierarchy. Examples of milder classism include forcing QA to use alternate entrances to get inside their buildings, banning them from company parties, excluding them from the credits rolls, and limiting their on-site internet access. Once again, this is more of a trend you'll find at the big publisher-funded QA factories. At smaller companies like game development studios themselves, QA is typically embedded closer to the developers, so they get to develop more of a positive relationship with one another, sharing each other's jargon, knowledge, and methodology, and that ultimately helps both teams do each other's jobs faster and better. At Publisher QA, you're also less likely to be given access to debugging tools, source code, documentation, basically the stuff that would help you figure out what's causing these bugs in the first place. But the most extreme example of classism I've heard here includes not being able to talk to game developers at all, where a brief conversation with someone above your pay grade results in a disciplinary write-up because you're in middle school, apparently. Yo, if you are actually working at one of these places that has implemented one of these policies of not even being allowed to talk to your fellow coworkers, that is a red flag. You should get out. The slim chance of actually enjoying a few years of life working QA as a meaningful, rewarding career is not likely to happen there. It can happen. It does happen. It's not likely to happen there. Careers for QA exist, but there aren't many that exist. In any given testing facility, you're likely to see 15, 20 temporary hires for every permanent one. There are some more recently developed positions for senior QA managers and QA engineers, and those positions are likely to be filled by people who genuinely enjoy this stuff. Those are the positions where you start to see the $20 to $23 an hour wages. You don't need a roommate at that income level. It's a job suited for someone who can do deductive detective work, someone who can also apply basic design and development principles to that work so they can write their reports in a more specialized vocabulary. It's a job for those into lateral thinking and logic puzzles, those who have a high patience for monotony and enjoy fixing broken stuff. Senior-level QA leads write test cases and tutorials that they grind their underlings through, and they typically have some access to the development team for feedback and support, and maybe a bit of real game development work to spice up their daily routine with, though you're probably gonna get the less flattering grunt work, polishing everything up kind of tasks. All of which, once again, was not happening at Publisher QA and their third-party outsourcers. I'm sure that exceptions to these rules exist, and I am speaking in generalities because, in general, it paints a pretty good picture of what kind of jobs you don't want to get. And that brings me to my last and final point, which is more of an appeal and a request to those who are trapped in the giant QA factories and seen as second-class citizens. For those who can't speak to their colleagues and the developers about it, for those who cannot speak up for themselves about it, for those who are thought of as mechanical robot people whose bodies and brains and personalities are being disintegrated away into the gut of a crunch, for those who know they'll be getting laid off, for those who know they'll never get a promotion, for those who know that they'll never be able to pay rent unless they work 20 to 30 extra hours of overtime every single week, for those who know that you are being exploited and mistreated and worked to the bone. Your bosses do not give a crap about you. That is the message these policies send. What kind of message are you gonna send to them? Talk to your colleagues about it. Talk to your coworkers about your wages, your hours, your working conditions, and how to improve your careers outside of a dead-end, entry-level gig. And if you ultimately decide to leave the industry, if you have something better set up someplace else, if you don't need the references and you can afford to burn those bridges, burn those bridges, ghost on them with your friends during a strategic time. You're not allowed to unionize as a contractor, but you can still sabotage the